His fiancée caught the billionaire sleeping beside the maid. Then she did something that shocked the entire mansion. This story might change the way you think. Because sometimes the person you're ready to hate is the person who just saved a life. And sometimes, the person you're ready to forgive doesn't deserve it at all. This is a story about a wedding dress that never got worn, a woman in red and white who never meant to break a family apart, and a bride in yellow who found out that the biggest moment of her life wasn't a wedding, it was a choice. Stay with me. Because what happened in that bedroom that morning was never what it looked like. And what happened after? Nobody in that mansion ever forgot it. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments, I'd love to know who's here with me. Today's story is one of the most emotional ones I've told in a while. It's about love, betrayal that wasn't really betrayal, and a woman who chose grace when everyone expected her to choose revenge. I promise you, this one has a twist you will not see coming. So stay till the end. Nobody becomes a billionaire by being weak. That's what Nathaniel Cole believed his entire life. At 34, Nate had built an empire from nothing. Real estate towers in 3 states, a tech investment fund that made headlines every quarter, and a name that opened doors before he even knocked. He lived in a Savannah mansion so grand that tourists sometimes stopped outside the gates just to take pictures. Marble floors. Chandeliers older than his grandparents. A staff of 12 who kept the whole place running like a clock. And in 6 weeks, he was set to marry Vivian Hart, the woman everyone said was perfect for him. Vivian was 30, beautiful, sharp, and came from old Charleston money herself. Their engagement had been on the cover of 2 regional magazines. People called them the golden couple. Everyone at the country club whispered about how lucky Nate was. But nobody knew the truth. Nate hadn't slept a full night in almost 4 months. It started small. A missed hour here, a racing heart there. Then it became something else, chest tightness that made him grip his desk during board meetings, dizzy spells he hid by pretending to check his phone, nights where he sat wide awake at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling of a bedroom that felt more like a business headquarters than a home. He told no one. Not his business partners. Not his mother. Not even Vivian. I'm fine, he'd say, every single time someone asked if he was okay. Just tired. Big deal closing next month. But deep down, something was wrong, and Nate Cole, a man who had never once in his life admitted weakness, was too proud to say it out loud. The one person in that entire mansion who noticed was a woman named Amora Bless. Amora was 34 years old, the head housekeeper of the Cole estate, and she had worked there for almost 6 years. She wasn't just staff to Nate, not really. She had been there through the death of his father. She had been there the night his mother had her stroke and Nate didn't know what to do with himself. She had quietly, without ever asking for recognition, become one of the few people in that giant house who actually saw him. Not the empire, not the headlines, just him. Amora had her own life outside those gates. A 10-year-old son named Micah, whom she was raising alone after his father walked out when Micah was 3. A small rented house 20 minutes from the estate. A mother back in Georgia she sent money to every single month. She worked long hours not because she loved cleaning mansions, but because Micah deserved a chance at a life bigger than the one she'd been handed. She never talked about her struggles at work. She simply worked, quietly, faithfully, kindly, and somewhere in 6 years, she had learned to read the exhaustion behind Nate Cole's expensive suits better than anyone paid to manage his calendar. "You didn't eat again today, Mr. Cole," she said one evening, setting a plate of food on his desk without being asked. "I'm not hungry, Amora." "You're never hungry anymore." She didn't push further. She just left the plate and walked out, the way she always did, never overstepping, never intruding, just present. That evening, Vivian called him for their nightly check-in call. She talked about flower arrangements, about the guest list, about a designer dress fitting scheduled for Friday. Nate listened, gave short answers, and stared out the window at the dark garden below. "You sound distracted," Vivian said. "Just work," he said. The same lie. The same wall. She didn't ask again. Vivian wasn't the type to dig. She had learned early in their relationship that Nate built walls the way other men built companies, efficiently and without apology. What none of them knew, not Nate, not Vivian, not even Amora herself yet, was that in less than 48 hours, one moment would explode everything they thought they understood about loyalty, love, and truth. Because the human body can only carry silence for so long before it breaks. And Nate Cole was about to break in front of the one person who happened to be standing close enough to catch him. It happened on a Tuesday morning, and it started with silence that lasted too long. Amora had come upstairs to open the curtains in Nate's study, a small routine she did every morning at 7. But that morning, something felt different. The door to his private study was open just a crack, and there was no sound of him typing, no sound of his usual morning coffee cup clinking against the desk. "Mr. Cole?" she called gently, knocking twice. No answer. She pushed the door open and found him on the floor beside his desk, one hand pressed against his chest, his face pale as paper, his breathing shallow and fast. "Mr. Cole." Amora dropped to her knees beside him immediately. Years of instinct, the same instinct that made her a good mother, took over instantly. She checked his pulse. Fast, but there. She checked his breathing. Rapid. Panicked. "Nate, look at me," she said, using his first name for the first time in 6 years without even realizing it. "You're having a panic attack. I need you to breathe with me, okay? In through your nose. Slow." He gripped her hand so tightly it nearly hurt. His eyes were wide with a fear she had never seen on him. Not the fear of losing money, or losing a deal, but the raw fear of a man who genuinely believed, in that moment, that he might be dying. I can't breathe." "You can. Look at me. In and out. In and out." She stayed with him for almost 20 minutes on that floor, talking him through it, refusing to leave, refusing to call an ambulance he begged her not to call because he didn't want the headlines, the leaks, the scandal of billionaire collapses splashed across financial news sites 2 weeks before his wedding. When his breathing finally slowed, when the color slowly came back into his face, Nate broke down in a way Amora had never witnessed. Not tears exactly, but a kind of collapse of pride, the wall coming down all at once. "I haven't slept in months," he admitted, voice raw. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I feel like I'm losing control of everything and I can't tell anyone because everyone needs me to be fine." "You don't have to be fine with me," Amora said quietly. "I'm not asking you to be the billionaire right now. I'm asking you to be a person who needs help." For the first time in longer than he could remember, Nate let himself be seen, not managed, not impressed, not performed for. Just seen. She helped him to his bedroom because his legs were still weak, sat him down on the edge of the bed, and made him drink water slowly. She checked his temperature with the back of her hand out of pure motherly instinct. He was exhausted, truly, deeply exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that builds for months and finally demands to be paid. "Just rest for a few minutes," she told him. "I'll stay until you fall asleep, and then I'll go get Dr. Simmons on the phone quietly, without alerting the staff." He nodded, too tired to argue. Amora sat on the edge of the bed beside him, still holding his hand because he hadn't let go, still speaking softly to keep him calm. Within minutes, his breathing evened out into real sleep, the first real sleep he'd had in weeks. And Amora, who had been up since 5 a.m. that morning, who had worked a 12-hour shift the day before, who was running on nothing but coffee and worry, felt her own eyes grow impossibly heavy. "Just a few minutes," she told herself. "Just until I know he's really asleep." She rested her head gently against his shoulder, still holding his hand, still fully dressed in her uniform, never once thinking of anything except making sure the man beside her was safe. Within minutes, she too was asleep. Neither of them heard the front door of the mansion open downstairs. Neither of them heard the familiar click of expensive heels on marble floors. Neither of them heard Vivian Hart, who had flown back 3 days early from her sister's bridal shower in New York to surprise her fiancé, climbing the grand staircase with a small velvet box in her hand, containing the wedding band she'd had specially engraved as a surprise gift. Neither of them heard her reach the bedroom door. Neither of them heard it creak open. The sound Vivian made when she saw them wasn't a scream. It was worse than a scream, it was silence, the kind that comes right before the world falls apart. She stood frozen in the doorway of the bedroom, both hands pressed against her mouth, her wedding gift still clutched in her fingers, staring at the sight in front of her. Nate, asleep in his suit, and curled against his shoulder, asleep in her red and white uniform, was Amora, the woman who had served her coffee at every visit, who had ironed the linens for their engagement dinner, who Vivian had smiled at and thanked 100 times without ever really seeing her. Vivian's mind did what every mind does in that first devastating second. It filled in the story before it had any facts. It didn't see exhaustion. It didn't see a panic attack, a collapse, an act of mercy from one human being to another. It saw betrayal. It saw the fiancé she trusted, tangled in bed with the maid, weeks before their wedding. Nate. Her voice cracked the silence like glass. He startled awake instantly, disoriented, his heart still weak from the episode hours before. Amora jolted up beside him a half-second later, immediately understanding, with horror, exactly how this looked. "Vivian, this isn't," Nate started, his voice still hoarse. "Don't." Vivian's whole body was trembling. "Don't you dare tell me what this isn't. I can see exactly what this is." "Vivian, please, let me explain." Amora stood quickly, smoothing down her uniform, her hands shaking. Nothing happened, I swear to you. He collapsed this morning, he had a panic attack, I was helping him and I must have fallen asleep, I would never." "Get out." Vivian's voice was ice now, controlled, dangerous in its stillness. "Get out of this room." Amora looked at Nate desperately, silently begging him to say something, anything, to make Vivian understand. But Nate, still weak, still recovering, still processing what had just happened, hesitated for one fatal second too long. That hesitation was all Vivian needed. "I flew back early," Vivian said, her voice shaking now, the ice cracking into something rawer. "I flew back early because I missed you. Because I wanted to surprise you with this." She threw the small velvet box onto the bed. It landed near Nate's leg, popping open to reveal a gold wedding band engraved with their wedding date. "And I find you like this." "Vivian, I swear, nothing happened." "I don't want to hear it." Her voice broke completely now, tears spilling despite her attempt to hold them back. "I don't want to hear excuses. I want you," she turned to Amora, "out of this house. Today. And you," she turned back to Nate, "I need you to stay away from me. I can't even look at you right now." She turned and walked out, her heels striking the marble floor like gunfire, each step echoing down the grand staircase, through the foyer, out the front door, into a car that sped away before either of them could catch up. The mansion, usually so full of quiet order, exploded into chaos within the hour. Staff whispered in corners. The head butler, Mr. Whitfield, tried to calm things down but had no real answers. By the time Nate had fully gathered himself enough to think straight, the story had already started spreading, first among the staff, then, inevitably, into the wider circles of Savannah's elite, who loved nothing more than a scandal wrapped in money. "Billionaire caught with housekeeper" wasn't a headline yet. But it was coming. Amora stood in the staff hallway, her uniform still slightly wrinkled from where she'd slept, tears streaming silently down her face, not because she cared what people thought of her reputation. She cared because she knew, with sick certainty, exactly what this would cost her. Her job. Her reputation in a town where reputations mattered. And possibly, the small stable life she had built for Micah. "I need to see Mr. Whitfield," she said quietly to another staff member, her voice trembling. "I think I'm about to be fired for something I didn't do." She was right. By that evening, Amora Bless had been let go. It wasn't Nate who fired her, he was too weak, too shaken, too consumed with trying to reach Vivian, who wasn't answering any calls. It was the estate manager, a stiff, image-conscious man named Reginald Pierce, who made the decision on his own, terrified of what a scandal might do to the family's reputation right before the wedding. "I'm sorry, Ms. Bless," Reginald said, not sounding sorry at all. "Given the circumstances, we can't have you continuing in this position. You'll receive 2 weeks severance." "I didn't do anything wrong," Amora said quietly, her voice steady despite the devastation crashing through her. Mr. Cole collapsed. "I helped him. That's all that happened." That's not what Ms. Hart believes, and frankly, it's not my place to decide who's telling the truth. I just need this handled quietly. Amora left the mansion that night with a small box of her belongings. 6 years of loyal service reduced to a 2-week check and a closed door. She drove home in silence, tears finally falling freely once she was alone in her car, thinking not of her own humiliation, but of Micah, of rent due in 9 days, of the small savings that wouldn't stretch far, of how she would explain to her 10-year-old son why she suddenly didn't have a job. Meanwhile, Nate sat alone in his enormous, silent mansion, staring at his phone, watching call after call to Vivian go straight to voicemail. He had tried explaining through text, through email, even shown up at her family's estate only to be turned away at the gate by her father, who made it clear Vivian wanted no contact. It was 2 days later, after Nate finally convinced Dr. Simmons to make a discreet house visit, that the full truth of what had actually happened that morning came into sharper focus. "Mr. Cole, based on what you've described, you experienced a severe panic attack, almost certainly triggered by prolonged stress and sleep deprivation," Dr. Simmons said gently, checking his blood pressure. "It's more common than people think, especially among high-stress executives. If your housekeeper hadn't intervened when she did, kept you calm, prevented you from panicking further, monitored your breathing, this could have escalated into something far more dangerous. A cardiac event isn't out of the question in cases like this." Nate sat frozen, absorbing what the doctor was really telling him. Amora hadn't just helped him that morning. She had potentially saved his life. And he had let her walk out that door without saying a single word in her defense. The guilt hit him like a physical weight. He thought back to the hesitation, that fatal, cowardly second of silence when Vivian had demanded answers and he'd said nothing fast enough, done nothing quickly enough, to protect the one person who had shown him more genuine care in 20 minutes than most people in his life had shown him in years. "I need her number," Nate said suddenly, standing up. Reginald fired her. "I need to find her." "Mr. Cole, your blood pressure." "I don't care about my blood pressure right now, doctor. I care about fixing something I broke." But when he called the estate office for Amora's contact information, he discovered something that made his stomach drop even further. In her final act of exhaustion and grief, Amora had asked that her personal information be removed from the staff files. She didn't want to be found. She didn't want pity, or a hollow apology, or to be near a family that had thrown her away without a second thought after 6 years of faithful work. She had disappeared, not far, but far enough that Nate had no easy way to reach her. Meanwhile, across town, Vivian sat in her childhood bedroom at her parents' estate, engagement ring still on her finger despite everything, staring blankly at wedding magazines she no longer had the heart to open. Her mother sat beside her, gently stroking her hair the way she had when Vivian was a little girl. "Maybe it isn't what it looked like," her mother said softly. "I know what I saw, Mom." Sometimes what we see and what actually happened are two very different things, sweetheart. You've always been quick to protect your heart. That's not a flaw. But it can make you quick to judge, too. Vivian said nothing, but somewhere deep down, in a place she wasn't ready to admit yet, a small doubt had already begun to grow. Grief has a strange way of making people finally slow down long enough to see the truth. For Nate, the days following Amora's disappearance became an obsession disguised as guilt. He hired a private investigator, quietly, discreetly, not to control or intrude on Amora's life, but simply to confirm she and her son were safe. When the investigator reported that Amora had taken a part-time cleaning job at a small motel across town, working double shifts to cover rent while searching for something steadier, Nate felt something in his chest tighten with shame he had never experienced in his entire privileged life. She had saved him. And in return, the world had punished her for it. He began, quietly, trying to undo the damage. He personally called Reginald Pierce into his office and terminated him on the spot for making a decision that wasn't his to make, especially without ever asking Nate's side of the story. He drafted, and had his lawyers formalize, a full severance package for Amora far beyond what she was owed, along with a written letter clearing her name for anyone who asked about her employment history. He made sure, quietly, that word reached the small circle of Savannah society that had begun whispering, correcting the record. Nothing inappropriate had occurred. A woman had helped save a man's life, and been punished for it by people too quick to assume the worst. But money and correction, Nate realized, couldn't undo 6 years of trust broken in a single afternoon. He needed to say it to her face. He needed her to know that he saw her, not as staff, not as a scandal, but as the person who had shown him more real care than almost anyone in his adult life. Meanwhile, Vivian was going through her own quiet reckoning. She had spent the week replaying that morning over and over, and the more she replayed it, the more small details began nagging at her that she had been too devastated to notice in the moment. Amora had still been in her full uniform. Nate had still been in his suit, tie only loosened, not removed. There had been no sign of anything except 2 exhausted, fully clothed people who had fallen asleep sitting up. And there was something else, something that bothered Vivian more than she wanted to admit. Amora's first instinct, even while being accused, hadn't been to defend herself. It had been to explain what had happened to Nate. She had been protecting him, not covering for herself. That wasn't the behavior of a woman having an affair. That was the behavior of someone who had genuinely been trying to help. Vivian finally called Dr. Simmons directly, something she probably should have done days earlier if pride hadn't gotten in the way. "Doctor, can you tell me honestly what happened that morning?" Dr. Simmons, bound loosely by discretion but recognizing the importance of the truth reaching the right person, explained everything. The panic attack, the risk of a cardiac event, the 20 minutes Amora had spent on the floor talking Nate through his breathing, refusing to leave him even when he begged her not to call an ambulance. "She may have saved his life, Ms. Hart. I want to be clear about that." Vivian sat in silence after the call ended, staring at nothing, feeling the full weight of what she had done crash over her. She had walked into that room, seen a picture without context, and destroyed a woman's livelihood and reputation based on a single frozen moment that told her nothing close to the real story. She thought about Amora, a woman raising a son alone, working double shifts, 6 years of quiet loyalty erased in an instant because Vivian's wounded pride hadn't paused to ask a single question before demanding punishment. For the first time since that terrible morning, Vivian's anger began to shift into something heavier, shame. And underneath the shame, a resolve began to form, one that would soon lead her to make a decision that would shock everyone who thought they understood who Vivian Hart really was. Finding Amora wasn't easy, but Nate refused to give up. He tracked her, through the investigators' careful and respectful research, to the small motel on the edge of town where she'd taken extra cleaning shifts. He didn't storm in with lawyers or apologies wrapped in money. He went alone, in jeans and a plain jacket instead of a suit, trying, for the first time in longer than he could remember, to show up as simply a person. He found her in the motel's small laundry room, folding sheets, exhaustion written plainly across her face. When she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, her expression shifted through several emotions at once. Shock, then hurt, then a guarded wall she quickly raised. "Mr. Cole." Her voice was flat, careful. "You shouldn't be here. Amora, please. Give me 5 minutes." "I gave you 6 years," she said quietly, not looking up from the sheets in her hands, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempt to stay composed. "I sat with you on that floor because I was scared you were dying. I lost my job protecting your privacy instead of calling an ambulance like I should have. And when the one moment came where you could have said something, one word, Nate, just one word to defend me, you said nothing." The use of his first name, stripped of any title, landed harder than any accusation could have. "You're right," Nate said, his voice breaking slightly. I froze. I was still recovering, I was scared, and I hesitated, and that hesitation cost you everything. I am so sorry, Amora. I'm not here to fix it with money, even though I've already tried to correct the record with everyone who needs to hear the truth. I'm here because you deserve to hear directly from me, not from a lawyer, not from a severance letter, that what you did for me that morning may have saved my life. And I let you walk out that door alone to face the consequences." Amora finally looked up, her eyes glistening, arms still full of folded sheets. "I don't need saving, Mr. Cole. I need people to see clearly before they judge. That's all I've ever needed." "I see you," Nate said quietly. "I should have said that a week ago. I'm saying it now." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the laundry machines filled the silence between them. "Micah asks about you sometimes," Amora finally admitted, a small, tired smile breaking through despite everything. "You gave him that toy telescope for his birthday last year, remember? He still uses it every night." "I remember." Nate's voice was thick with emotion he wasn't used to showing. "How is he? How are you managing?" "We're managing," Amora said simply, the quiet strength of a mother who had managed through far worse evident in every word. "We always do." Nate reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, not severance, not charity, but a formal written offer. Head of household staff at double her previous salary, full benefits, and, something he'd thought carefully about, full authority over hiring and managing her own team, a position of real respect rather than quiet service. "This isn't an apology wrapped in a paycheck," he said. "This is me recognizing what you're actually worth, which I clearly failed to see clearly enough before. Take it or don't. Either way, I needed you to know the truth is out there now, correcting the record. Nobody in this town believes the story that was assumed that day. Not anymore." Amora stared at the envelope for a long moment before finally setting down the sheets and taking it, her hands trembling slightly. "I need to think about it," she said quietly. "This isn't a simple decision for me." "Take all the time you need," Nate said. "You've more than earned that." He turned to leave, pausing once at the door. "For what it's worth, Amora, in 20 minutes on that floor, you showed me more genuine care than most people show in years. I won't forget that. Whatever you decide." He left her standing there, envelope in hand, the small laundry room suddenly feeling very quiet. What neither of them knew was that, at that very moment, across town, Vivian Hart was climbing back into her car after making a decision of her own, one that would bring all three of their stories crashing back together in a way nobody at that mansion would ever forget. Vivian showed up at Nate's mansion unannounced on a rainy Thursday afternoon, still wearing the same engagement ring she hadn't been able to bring herself to remove, even through days of anger and confusion. Mr. Whitfield let her in, and she found Nate in his study, staring blankly at paperwork he clearly wasn't reading. "Vivian." He stood immediately, surprised. "I didn't expect." "I talked to Dr. Simmons," she said, cutting straight to it, her voice steady despite the emotion clearly underneath. "I know what actually happened that morning." Nate froze, uncertain what was coming next. "I owe you an apology," Vivian continued, her voice cracking slightly. "And I owe an even bigger one to Amora, if she'll ever speak to me again after what I did to her. I walked into that room and I saw exactly what I was afraid of seeing, instead of what was actually there. I let my fear write the whole story before I asked a single question. That's on me, Nate. That's entirely on me." "Vivian." "Let me finish," she said, wiping her eyes but continuing steadily. "I've been thinking a lot this past week, not just about that morning, but about us, honestly. About whether the reason I jumped to the worst conclusion so fast is because some part of me already sensed we weren't as solid as everyone assumed we were. We built a beautiful engagement, Nate. Magazine covers, perfect photos, everyone telling us how lucky we were. But when things got hard, When I needed you to be honest with me about how you were really doing, about your stress, your health, you never let me in. Not once in almost 2 years. And that hurts more than what happened in that room, if I'm honest with myself." Nate sat back down slowly, absorbing the weight of her words, recognizing the painful truth in them. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "I never let anyone in. Not really. Not even you. I built walls so high I didn't even realize how alone I'd made myself until I collapsed on my study floor, and the only person who noticed something was wrong was the woman who cleaned my house, because she was the only one paying close enough attention to see past the walls." Vivian nodded slowly, tears falling freely now, but her voice remaining calm, almost peaceful in its honesty. "I think," she said softly, "that we've been trying to build a marriage on the idea of us, the golden couple, the magazine cover, instead of the real, messy, honest version of two people who actually know each other. And I don't think that's fair to either of us." Nate felt something shift in his chest, not devastation exactly, but a strange, quiet relief mixed with grief, the feeling of a truth finally being spoken after being avoided for far too long. "Are you ending the engagement?" he asked quietly. "I think we're ending it together," Vivian said gently, sliding the ring from her finger and placing it carefully on his desk, no anger in the gesture, only a sad, mature acceptance. "I think somewhere underneath the hurt and the assumptions, we both already knew this wasn't the love either of us actually deserves. I'd rather we both find something real than spend our lives performing something beautiful for everyone else." They sat in silence for a long moment, the rain tapping steadily against the study windows. Two people releasing something they had both, on some level, already known wasn't right. "There's something else," Vivian said finally, straightening up, wiping her eyes one last time with new determination in her voice. "I need to find Amora. I need to apologize to her myself, face to face. And I have an idea about how to make this right, not just with an apology, but with something that actually matters." "What kind of idea?" Vivian allowed herself a small, genuine smile for the first time in days. "The kind that's going to shock this entire mansion," she said. "Trust me." 2 weeks later, the entire household staff gathered in the mansion's grand dining hall for what Mr. Whitfield had only described as an important announcement. Rumors had swirled the entire week. Some said Nate was selling the estate, others whispered about a merger, a few even speculated the wedding was somehow back on despite everything the staff had witnessed. Nobody expected what actually happened. Amora stood near the back of the room, having accepted Nate's offer after 2 weeks of careful consideration. Not because of guilt or charity, but because, after speaking with her own mother and thinking hard about what kind of example she wanted to set for Micah, she realized walking away entirely would mean letting an injustice define her choices. She deserved the respect and opportunity being offered, and she had more than earned it. She stood tall in a simple, professional outfit, no longer the uniform of quiet invisible service, but the attire of someone stepping into genuine leadership within the household. Vivian walked into the room, and a hush fell over the staff immediately. Many of them still associated her with the dramatic scene from weeks earlier, and nobody quite knew what to expect. Vivian walked directly to Amora, and in front of the entire staff, she did something nobody anticipated. "Amora," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the silent room, "I owe you a public apology, and I intend to give you one properly, in front of everyone who witnessed what happened weeks ago. Because the damage to your reputation happened publicly, and the correction needs to happen publicly too." Amora stood frozen, stunned, as Vivian continued. "I walked into a room, saw something I didn't understand, and instead of asking a single question, I let fear and hurt make me cruel. You had spent that morning helping save a man's life, at real risk to your own job and reputation, and I repaid that by having you fired within hours. That was wrong. That was deeply, deeply wrong, and I am sorry, not just for what I said, but for how quickly I was willing to believe the worst about someone who had shown nothing but loyalty and kindness for 6 years." The room was utterly silent, staff members exchanging stunned glances. "But an apology alone doesn't undo what happened," Vivian continued, pulling a folded document from her bag. So I've set up a full college fund for your son, Micah, fully funded through graduation, no conditions attached, no strings, nothing expected in return. It's not enough to fix what I did. But it's a start toward making sure my mistake doesn't cost your family's future, on top of everything else it already cost you." Amora's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling freely now, completely overwhelmed. "Ms. Hart, I can't accept something like this." "You can," Vivian said gently, "because this isn't charity. This is accountability. There's a difference, and I need you to let me make this right." The staff in the room, many of whom had worked alongside Amora for years, began quietly applauding, a slow, spreading wave of respect and emotion filling the grand dining hall. Nate stood near the doorway, watching the scene unfold, feeling a complicated mixture of pride, grief, and quiet hope. His engagement had ended, his carefully built public image had cracked, but somehow, watching this moment, he felt more genuinely connected to the people around him than he had in years of magazine covers and perfect photographs. After the room slowly began to clear, Vivian approached Nate one last time. "I hope you find someone who lets you fall apart sometimes," she said quietly, no bitterness in her voice, only genuine warmth. "Someone who you don't have to perform strength for every single second. You deserve that, Nate. We both do." "Thank you," Nate said, and meant it fully. "For everything. Especially this." Vivian smiled, nodded once toward Amora across the room with genuine respect, and walked out of the mansion for the final time. Not as a woman defeated, but as one who had chosen, in the end, to do the harder, better thing. 6 months passed, and the Cole estate slowly transformed into something it had never truly been before, a home rather than a headquarters. Amora settled fully into her new role, running the household with quiet confidence and genuine authority, her team of staff treating her with a respect that had always been earned, even when it hadn't always been given. Micah's college fund sat steadily growing, a promise of a future his mother had worked her whole life to give him. Nate, for his part, had begun something he'd never truly done before: actual therapy, actual rest, actual boundaries around his work. Dr. Simmons monitored his health closely, and slowly, the panic attacks that had plagued him for months began to fade as he learned, piece by piece, how to build a life that didn't require constant performance and constant walls. Something had grown between Nate and Amora in those months. Not sudden, not dramatic, but slow and steady, built on the kind of honesty neither of them had experienced in their previous relationships. It started with simple conversations over coffee in the mornings, Nate finally asking real questions about her life, her son, her dreams beyond the walls of his mansion. It grew into shared dinners, quiet laughter, an ease neither of them had expected to find. Neither rushed it. Both understood, deeply, what it meant to have trust broken and rebuilt, and neither wanted to repeat old mistakes by moving too fast toward something that deserved to be built carefully, honestly, and with mutual respect. "I'm not interested in another perfect couple on a magazine cover," Nate told her one evening, as they sat together on the back porch overlooking the garden, Micah's laughter drifting from where he played nearby with the same toy telescope Nate had given him years before. "I just want something real. Slow, honest, real." Amora smiled, the kind of smile that held years of hard-earned wisdom behind it. "Real is all I've ever wanted to offer anyone," she said softly. "I'm glad you're finally ready to receive it." Vivian, meanwhile, had found her own quiet transformation. She'd taken a step back from Savannah's social circles, focusing instead on a non-profit she'd started, one dedicated to protecting domestic workers' rights, born directly from her own painful lesson about how quickly assumptions could destroy an innocent person's life and livelihood. She occasionally sent updates to Amora, and the two women, against every expectation anyone might have had built an unlikely, genuine friendship rooted in mutual respect and shared growth. The mansion that had once buzzed with whispered scandal now held something far quieter, far steadier, the sound of a family being built honestly, brick by brick, choice by choice. There's a moment in every difficult story where the truth finally has room to breathe. For Nate, that moment came on the floor of his study, when the person who saved his life turned out to be the same person the world was too quick to condemn. For Amora, it came in a small motel laundry room, when she finally understood that her worth didn't depend on other people's assumptions, but on the quiet integrity she had carried through every hard year of her life. And for Vivian, it came the moment she chose accountability over pride, understanding that the strongest thing a person can do isn't defend their wounded ego. It's admit when they got it wrong and work to make it right. This story carries a lesson worth holding on to. The loudest, most painful moments in life are rarely the whole truth. What we see in a single frozen second, a photograph, a doorway, a headline, almost never tells the full story of what actually happened, or why. Before judgment, before anger, before assumption, there is always room for one simple, powerful question. What actually happened here? Amora never set out to be anyone's hero. She simply chose, in a moment of crisis, to be kind. And that kindness, nearly costing her everything, eventually became the foundation for a life built on genuine respect, real love, and a future for her son that no one could have promised her 6 months earlier. Vivian never set out to become someone defined by her worst moment. But she chose, eventually, to become someone defined by how she made it right. And in doing so, she became someone far stronger than the golden couple image she'd spent years trying to maintain. And Nate learned, at 34 years old, after building an empire from nothing, that the most valuable thing in his entire life had never been in his boardrooms or his bank accounts. It had been sitting quietly in his own home the whole time, in the form of a woman who saw him, really saw him, long before he ever let himself be seen. If this story touched you today, I want you to remember this. Kindness is never wasted, even when the world misjudges it in the moment. Truth always finds its way to daylight, even when it takes time. And grace, real grace, the kind Vivian chose, the kind Amora lived every single day, is always stronger than pride. If you felt something watching this story unfold, do me a favor. Hit that like button. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who might need to hear it today. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this one, because there are so many more waiting to be told. And if someone in your life could use a reminder that truth and kindness always win in the end, share this story with them. Thank you for staying with me through this one. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.